Hello, 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 and happy spooky Halloween week. And of course, welcome back to Behind the Walls of the World Psychiatric Hospitals. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Gallup, and today's episode fits perfectly into Halloween week because we are going to be telling scary ghost stories from Rolling Hills Asylum. Last week, we talked about the history of the facility, which went by the name Genesee County Poor Farm while it was in operation. But in 2010, the building was revived as a haunted attraction and rebranded as Rolling Hills Asylum. At the end of the episode, I'll tell you about the types of haunted experiences that are offered there and how you can visit the site if you're in the area. Now, I will give this caveat. I find many aspects of dark tourism to be problematic. The idea of people profiting from the stories of real people who lived, worked, and died there is a bit disturbing. I get that some people like to be scared, but I always want to respect the lives of the people who actually lived and experienced this mistreatment. But as with anything, it's possible to hold both things to be true at the same time. We can honor the lives of the people who were treated there and still get creeped out going through a scary old building. My main sources for this episode will be the Rolling Hills Asylum website, an episode from the Discovery Channel show Ghost Asylum on Rolling Hills Asylum, and a BuzzFeed Unsolved episode on Rolling Hills. All other sources will be listed at the end of the episode transcript. So come on in and get comfortable as we go behind the walls of Rolling Hills Asylum. Throughout the history of the Genesee County Poor Farm, about 1,700 patients died there, or at least 1,700 that have been documented. Their remains were most likely interred somewhere on the 200-plus acre parcel, but the cemetery has never been found. This fact lends credence to the belief that the souls of those who once resided at the asylum may possibly have never left. There are stories of both patients and staff who spent time at the poor farm and whose specters are said to remain in the asylum today. I don't actually know if these stories are based upon real people or if they've been fabricated to enhance the lore of the haunted facility, but here are their stories. First is a former nurse named Emma. She's said to have been from Germany. Some sources say she was a kindly woman who was dedicated to her job. Others say she viciously abused patients and was rumored to have practiced witchcraft. In any case, her room is located at the end of a dark, narrow hallway. It's a rather large room and is modestly decorated. In the BuzzFeed Unsolved episode, ghost hunters Shane and Ryan decide to call out for help in order to catch Emma's attention, but she doesn't answer them. In the Ghost Asylum episode, the ghost hunters arrive on the anniversary of Emma's 135th birthday. They bring her a cake with the hope of luring her out to celebrate. When they prompt Emma to blow out the candles on the cake, their thermal cameras pick up some movement in the flicker of the birthday candles. They pause, wide-eyed, and prompt the spirit to try blowing the candles out one more time. Again, the flames sway gently as if someone were faintly blowing at them. Meanwhile, on the EVP, which is said to pick up words or short phrases emitted by nearby spirits, the word crash came through. The ghost hunters decided that it was not Emma who was present, but the spirit of a former patient, whom we'll discuss in a moment. When they asked Emma if she liked the cake, a voice that sounded like a child came through and said, "I do too." But the Ghost Asylum investigators believed that the spirit in Emma's room with them was that of a former patient, Roy Krause. Now, if true, Roy's story is particularly sad. Roy was said to have been born with gigantism around 1890. His parents surrendered him to the poor farm when he was only 12 years old, and he eventually grew to be over 7.5 feet tall. Now, I don't know a lot about gigantism, so I looked into it a little bit further. It's known in the medical field as pediatric acromegaly and pituitary gigantism, which occurs when there are high levels of growth hormone. Often, a tumor on the pituitary gland can cause an excess production of growth hormone, which can lead to gigantism. When left untreated, as it certainly would have been at the turn of the 20th century, gigantism can lead to mobility issues, osteoarthritis, peripheral neuropathy, sleep apnea, type 2 diabetes, and perhaps most commonly, an enlarged heart and heart valve issues. Many folks with gigantism die from heart complications at an early age. I was thinking in particular of French wrestler Andre the Giant, who some of you may remember from The Princess Bride. He died at age 46 from congestive heart failure. Roy Krauss was known to love classical music, especially operas, and he loved to read. His room, number 113, has bookshelves lined with books. He has a specially built bed designed to accommodate his large frame. Roy's spirit is said to be friendly and protective in nature. When the owner of Rolling Hills Asylum, Sharon Coyle, started working at the facility, she was walking near Roy's room when she thought she heard a kitten. Instead, it was a rat, and it startled her, and she let out a scream. A day or so later, she saw huge footprints on the floor and a giant bloody handprint on the wall next to a dead rat. In Sharon's view, Roy must have killed the rat as punishment for scaring her. Perhaps it was his way of protecting her? In the BuzzFeed Unsolved episode, Shane and Ryan attempt to coax Roy to talk to them by playing classical music. They get two phrases on their EVPs. A woman's voice saying, "Can't stay," and a man's voice saying, "Cold winter." Whether those have anything to do with Roy, I'll let you decide. In the Ghost Asylums episode, the investigators used their K2 meters to explore Roy's room. They also played classical music in an attempt to lure him out. The K2 meter lit up bright red, a sign that energy was nearby. Then the EVP squawked and read, "Sister." They were quick to point out that Roy had had sisters. And a moment later it buzzed and read, "Children." Then, oddly, the EVP cracked again and said, "Evil." The investigators suddenly wondered if it really was Roy in the room with them at all, or another, more sinister spirit. We'll get to him in a moment. For all the lore, Roy Krauss was a real person. His death is listed in the April 13th, 1942 edition of the Buffalo News. It simply reads, "Bethany, New York, Roy Krauss, 52, in the death section. If the story about Roy is true, that he was surrendered by his parents at age 52, or at age 12, that means that he would have spent 40 years at the Genesee County Poor Farm until his death. And now to go back to that sinister spirit. The Ghost Asylum investigators were concerned that they may not be communicating with friendly, gentle Roy at all, but rather the spirit of a former staff member named Raymond. Raymond was said to be brutally violent toward anyone, patients, staff, kids. He was a menace, to say the least. He's said to show up in the morgue in particular, but he'll follow visitors around, pretending to be other spirits. Raymond isn't mentioned in the episode of BuzzFeed Unsolved, but another sinister ghost was. Shane and Ryan visit the room of Steve, another former staff member, who is said to be not friendly. Steve's room was next door to Emma's and much smaller. It was very sparsely decorated. When Shane and Ryan used the EVP in Steve's room, the EVP sounded like it said, Is there a doctor here? Do ghosts still need doctors in the afterlife? And if so, does that mean that doctors have to keep working? Hmm. There was also an unnamed screaming lady, which sounds terrible. Owner Sharon Coyle wondered if perhaps the screaming lady was Phoebe White, who was one of the first residents who came to the poor farm as a child. Coyle said that Phoebe White lived at the poor farm for 56 years until her death. Now the spirit of the screaming lady appears to get so frustrated that she just screams. I was able to watch just one scene of an episode from Ghost Adventures, Season 4, Episode 1, where the investigator is in the room. He's made a circle on the floor of candlesticks, and he asks, strangely, "What type of evil stuff did you do?" Which is followed immediately by the faint sound of a woman screaming, and then all the candles flicker at once. Sharon Coyle also notes that one location is called the Shadow Hallway on the way to the old infirmary. This is where the shadow people reside, she says. In the BuzzFeed Unsolved episode, Coyle says, quote, "Shadow people could look like you and me. Solid. They can be light gray, medium gray, dark gray, or pitch black. They can be normal human-shaped or amorphous shapes," end quote. She then describes how they go in and out of doorways, walk the hall, sometimes poke an arm or a leg out, or crawl on the floor. She added that sometimes when someone is sitting on the floor conducting an investigation, they can see the shadows moving slowly toward them. Coyle has also said that she thinks this shadow hallway may be a portal to something. Visitors report feeling uneasy when they're there, and some simply cannot walk. While Ryan investigated, he detected the presence of a spirit and asked if it was Roy. "No," the EVP said back. "Well, who is it?" Ryan asked. "No one," was the answer. Ryan seemed frustrated by this and said, "Oh, you want to play?" And the EVP said, "Sure." That's when Ryan decided he'd had enough and ducked out of there. The morgue was another place of unusual activity. I mean, sort of to be expected, I guess. That seems as creepy of a place as any, ghosts or no ghosts. There was a slab where autopsies would be conducted in the middle of the room, and a suit hanging off to the side that was said to move on its own. People have reported feeling uneasy or ill when lying down on the slab. When one of the ghost asylum investigators lay down on the slab, he immediately reported feeling weird, like he had vertigo, and his stomach was suddenly upset. He got up and stated that he felt better. His fellow investigator lay down on the slab, and he, too, suddenly felt dizzy and sick to his stomach. I'm not entirely sure that that wasn't the power of suggestion, but who knows? While he was still lying on the slab, the second investigator called out for help to see if any spirits would arrive. As soon as he called out, the EVP read, "Count." They weren't sure what that meant, but strangely enough, the suit that was hanging off to the side started slowly spinning, as if pushed by a draft of wind. But there was no draft of wind. Another place of unusual activity was the rec hall, where chairs are said to move on their own. When Shane and Ryan from the BuzzFeed Unsolved episode set up a recording device, they capture a strange sound. They played it several times, and it sounds just like a chair being pushed back. They bicker back and forth about what it could be, but it definitely sounded like a chair being pushed. So, who knows? Jury is still out. And perhaps the most disturbing room, to me at least, was down in the basement, in a room called the Christmas Room. Back when children lived at the facility, they would be taken down to the basement to meet Santa. And I don't know, but that sounds like the start of a horror film to me, doesn't it? But Anyway, down in the Christmas room, the toys that are there are said to move on their own. While Shane and Ryan were down there, they had brought this stuffed dog that was supposed to detect static nearby, and then its nose would light up. The investigators invited the spirits of any children that may be lingering to pet the dog, if they wanted to. Then they left the room, but kept the dog there. An hour later, without anyone around, the dog's nose lit up. So what do you think? Did a child's spirit accept their invitation to pet the stuffed dog? These are the main characters and active areas in the facility today. So what I want to do now is share some of the stories from the Rolling Hills Asylum website. Visitor Mary shares the following about her experience. Quote, in 1998, my fiancé, now husband, had an herb shop called the Raven's Nest in the room across from what was a little restaurant. A grandson of someone offered to take us upstairs when I told him about noises I was hearing, and I kept seeing a woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform walk past our shop door. When I would look down the hall, she would be gone, but you could hear her shoes squeaking. We went upstairs, and the owners had taken all the doors off and laid them inside the rooms. My husband and the boy, I cannot remember his name, were walking beside me. Now, I've been a psychic since I fell 6 feet onto concrete, splitting my head open, and I was hearing low murmuring. As we walked past the rooms, at one point, one at a time, you could hear the doors slam shut. The boys were walking very fast at this point, but I saw movement from the corner of my eye. I stopped in front of one room and saw an old metal tub with a high back, an elderly man sitting there in steaming hot water, eyes closed and skin bright red. The woman in white that I had been seeing was leaning over him with a strange smile on her face. Everything happened very fast, and the vision was gone, replaced by a room with rubble about the floor. I never saw the woman in front of our shop again. I always did hear murmuring, squeaking of wheelchairs, and children laughing. I seem to draw spirits to me if they are around, maybe because they know I can hear them. It's good to know that this building and its history will be taken care of. I'm sure the spirits will be a bit happier. Well, some of them. I have more things to tell about experiences there, but that is for next time. End quote. Mike from New Jersey Paranormal Research says, quote, we had just went up the stairs by the office area and started looking in rooms for a digital recorder we had left when we caught this loud, please stay in your room, then, it's nothing. We didn't hear these things when we recorded them, only on playback, end quote. Carrie, the co-founder and lead investigator of CPAIR, writes a long entry about their experience. Quote, on April 26, 2008, CPAIR did an overnight public ghost hunt at Rolling Hills. It was not the first time at Rolling Hills for Mike or Ray, but it was for myself, Carrie. Arriving around 4 p.m. to the area, we went to Rolling Hills to get some pictures during the daylight hours and to see if we could talk with Lori, the previous owner. Although there were some cars outside, the entrance doors were locked. The doors opened for the public ghost hunt at 9:30 p.m., and we arrived around 9:10 p.m., and there were a few other people already present and waiting. Once you get inside, you have to sign in and go through a short tour of the building with a staff member who tells you some of the experiences that occurred in specific locations. Following the tour, there was a short informational video shown about Rolling Hills. There were said to be 50 people present during this ghost hunt, and there were 2 tour groups. We were part of the first tour group, and when we were done watching the video, we were allowed to go to the basement area to begin investigations so that we did not disturb the other tour group on the upper level. And with that, our investigation began. We used devices such as digital audio recorders, video recorder with night vision, a thermometer gauge, EMF readers, flash cameras. We also had a ghost box and sound amplifier present with us, but we didn't get to use them. Lastly, we had our own senses to experience all that Rolling Hills has to offer. As far as apparitions and shadow people, none made themselves known that night. We also did not get any hits on the EMF reader or drastic changes in temperature with the thermometer gauge. When it comes to evidence caught on camera, we did catch some orbs in many pictures, with some being more impressive than others, and what appears to be some mist formation coming out from behind the nurse's station door. In regard to the orbs, the facility is very old. There's a lot of dust within the building. In regard to the mist, however, the facility is strictly non-smoking indoors, and there is no source of smoke or mist in the environment. On film, we did catch a rather interesting find using a flashlight for a flashlight experiment on the second floor hallway, where the doors to the solarium has been known to move on their own, and shadows of people standing and walking behind the doors in the solarium appear to occur when nobody is in the solarium. Since it was dark and catching the shadows of something walking on the other side of the doors was impossible to catch using the video camera even with night vision, Mike came up with the idea of placing a flashlight on the other side of the doors in the solarium, while we sat in the hallway to see if we could catch sight of any of these shadows walking about and catch them on film. There is no other way in or out of the solarium, and there was nobody in the solarium. A short while after placing the flashlight within the room, the light had begun dimming, as if something was walking up to it, and was even completely blocked, as if something walked by it. There was an attempt to communicate with any spirits within the area when it appeared as if something walked quickly back across the light, and there was no further movement or flickering of the light following that occurrence. And we sat there for a while afterwards. Of note, the flashlight had not had any problems with flickering previously, and all the batteries to the flashlight we carried were new. Was this a paranormal event or just a flashlight problem? This we cannot say. But there has not been any other problems with the flashlight flickering on or turning on and off. And if you watch the movement of the shadow across the floor, it definitely appears as if it is from movement in front of the flashlight as opposed to a flashlight problem on our team. We also had caught some EVPs with our digital audio recorders. During the public ghost hunt, it was difficult to find a quiet location without someone walking and talking close by, and we had to wait until early morning hours when most of the people had left to do our EVP sessions to prevent contamination. One very impressive one was when Mike was trying to provoke the shadow people into coming into the hallway on the second floor, and following a request of telling the residents to come out into the hallway, there was a Class A EVP with a voice of what sounds like an elderly lady yelling back, "You, go away," which we did not hear when recording. As far as our own experiences, I was the only one that experienced anything personally. Upon our arrival in the afternoon at the facility, I had felt a dizziness that had stayed with me while we were there in the afternoon and went away after we were in the car and left the area. I don't know if this had anything to do with the facility or with the long car ride. I felt it was a pretty weird experience anyhow. When sitting up in the electrotherapy room, I had experienced 2 episodes of a sharp pain that lasted approximately 1 minute to the left side of my head, especially right above my left eye. It only happened twice, and only while in the electrotherapy room. Around 4 a.m., Mike and I traveled from the area of the organ room down to the second hallway and sat against the sides of the hall, Mike on one side and myself on the other. During the walk down to the hallway, and while sitting in the hallway, I kept getting a cobweb effect across my face. This was occurring even when not walking and just sitting. I was mentioning the things to Mike, but was thinking to myself that it could just be my hair. There were a few other people at the end of the hallway near the solarium doors who were quietly talking amongst themselves. While Mike and I sat there waiting to see if we could see any of the shadow people, I began to feel something lightly touch slash move slash crawl up my right leg, starting where the sock jean line was, and continued up to my mid calf. At that point, I began thinking possibly a spider, which I definitely did not want crawling up my pant leg, causing me to quickly crawl across the hallway over to Mike and startling him while telling him something was crawling on me and I think it's a spider. The people at the other end of the hall quickly get up and begin to leave after seeing me complain of something crawling on me. They stopped to ask what I had experienced, and they shared that one of them was feeling something touching her hair and having the cobweb effect, and another seeing a shadow peeking out from one of the doors, which was making them feel very uncomfortable and they had to get out of the area. There was no spider or bug in my jean leg or in the area where we were sitting when trying to find the source of the touch. It was actually after this incident in which Mike and I went over to where the other people were sitting, and since we were the only ones left in the area, began to do the EVPs, and we caught the EVP of the elderly lady's voice as mentioned above. We had returned to Rolling Hills on July 18th, 2009 for a private investigation. Again, weather was clear, and the time was from 9:30 p.m. to 6 a.m. During this investigation, there was a disembodied voice that called out the name of one of our investigators that was heard by two other investigators in the area and can also be heard in the background on our voice recorders. Nobody in the building had called his name. While investigating the third floor, there were sounds of someone walking or shuffling around in which when we went to find the source of the sound, it would stop, and then we'd hear it coming from a different area of the third floor. Again, on this investigation, as with the previous one, there were a couple of times when it felt like a cobweb had dragged across my face. Once it was while I was sitting in a chair on the second floor hallway, in which I felt the cobweb-like touch to my face, and a couple seconds later, one of the other investigators further down the hallway stated that it felt as if something lightly touched their hand. They were standing in the middle of the hallway, whereas I was sitting more off to the side. However, I was leaning forward in the chair toward the middle of the hallway. There was a bathroom there which, on both investigations, gave off a raw sewage smell. Possible plumbing issues? Prior to the formation of CPAIR, co-founder Mike Mafera investigated Rolling Hills with his father Ray, and Mike was also photographed with a rather large mist formation near him while using dowsing rods in what appeared to be the cafeteria or recreation hall. We would love to share any and all evidence we captured there while we investigated Rolling Hills. Thanks, and it's great to hear that Rolling Hills has reopened its doors for further paranormal investigations and researching. We hope to talk with you all soon. End quote. So my next step was I wanted to go to Reddit and see what others had experienced at Rolling Hills Asylum. Here's a story written by a user called Ghost Encounters from about 9 years ago. Quote, yesterday, I went to the infamous Rolling Hills Asylum, one of the most haunted locations in the world, for a 3-hour tour and ghost hunt. I went with my mom because she's interested in ghosts too. We didn't have any equipment besides our phones and a recording device on my mom's phone. Besides, it was during the daytime too, and we only had about an hour and a half to investigate. After our tour, we walked around and went to the shadow person hallway, aka the female ward, up on the second floor. When we got into the first room, located on the left, there were some toys scattered in one part of the room for the children's spirits. As soon as we walked in, a volleyball on the floor slowly rolled toward us and then stopped. It had roughly moved a foot or two across the floor. I put it back in its original spot, and it did not appear that there were any drafts in the room. I kicked the ball around, asking for a spirit to come play with me, but the ball didn't move. I was disappointed because only seconds before I had walked into the room, I had turned off my phone and had just turned it back on as soon as we stepped into the room, but was not fast enough to get the camera to record. My mom had her recorder on her phone rolling as I attempted to make contact with any spirits in the room, and I thought I heard a whistling noise upon playback. Next, we headed out into the hallway, and I sat on a wheelchair that is supposed to move by itself. It didn't move to me, but we still had more time to investigate. We headed over to the infirmary part of the building and went to the room where, on Ghost Adventures, it was the door that slammed. I took a look around, but didn't have any experiences there. We didn't have anything really happen in the infirmary, but it was a cool place. We headed up to the organ room, where George Fleming is said to have died, and on the episode of Ghost Adventures, it's where they found blood on the walls and candles and such, and where Nick captures the disembodied scream. And just a side note from Sarah to say that this is the scene I referenced earlier about the screaming lady. I sat roughly where he sat, but no ghost activity occurred. However, there was an eerie feeling about the room that I didn't feel in any other room. It was odd, but since we weren't getting any activity, we decided to leave and went downstairs, all the way down to the morgue. In the morgue, there was an autopsy table. I think it was where people claimed that there was a heaviness on their chest when they laid down on it. I laid on the table and didn't feel anything. There was a suit hanging on a string nearby that if you asked questions about people in the room, the suit would turn in that person's direction. When a few other people entered the morgue, they asked if the suit would turn to my mom and me. It was still and nobody had moved it. Then it slowly turned toward my mom and me and then stopped. When I was lying on the table, it hadn't moved at all. But now it was turning toward us. Pretty creepy, but I wanted to see some more parts of the building and kept moving. We went to the area where on Ghost Hunters, a door supposedly moved toward Jason. I'm not too big of a fan of Ghost Hunters, but this was pretty early on in the show, which was more credible, but paranormal TV shows are always a subject of debate if they're real or not. We had found that door accidentally looking for the basement tunnels where the spirit of Raymond is said to be. My mom took one look in the room and said she didn't like it. She felt there were spirits in there. My mom is not psychic at all, but she says she can almost feel the presence of a ghost when she has a heaviness in her chest. Not like the morgue tables where people felt pressure on their chests. This, she said, was like a heavy feeling. I looked around inside, but I couldn't really feel anything. We went back to the shadow person hallway once more, and as I made my way there, I looked up at the end of the hallway, and it looked like a shadowy woman with curly hair and a bun at the back of her head went into one room. I hurried down the corridor, and it looked like the woman had gone into a room where the doors were closed. In the next room over, there were 3 women trying to communicate with the spirits, but none of them looked like what I had seen, especially since the woman I saw moving across the hallway was completely black. There was another room, I believe, known as the Vortex Room, and my mom felt sick in there, but the moment she left, she felt okay again. It was nearing the end of the investigation, so we had to wrap it up. I sat in the wheelchair once more and listened because I thought I had heard a creepy squeaking noise next to me. My mom began to leave to go to where everyone was supposed to meet up at the end, and I heard the squeaking begin to follow her down the hallway, so I rushed over and told her. End quote. So those are the stories from people who have been to Rolling Hills Asylum and lived to tell about their experiences. So if this sounds like an adventure that you'd like to take, feel free to go check out the Rolling Hills website. It's rollinghillsasylum.com. There are public tours and ghost hunts, as well as the possibility of private tours and hunts. The historical tour is a 2-hour guided walking tour. There's also a 2-hour flashlight tour. The psych hold tour is a 3-hour self-guided ghost hunt. The detained tour is a 4-hour self-guided ghost hunt. The ICU tour is 5 hours, and the captive tour is 6 hours. There are also overnight ghost hunt options. And obviously, there are special events for Halloween. This year, they're playing a horror film, Legion, if you're familiar with it, paired with all-you-can-eat nachos and a ghost hunt from 7 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. So if you're in the area, check that out, rollinghillsasylum.com. And that is where I'm going to end the story of the Genesee County Poor Farm, which is now known as Rolling Hills Asylum. As always, thank you so much for listening. I will be off for the next 2 weeks for the absolute best reason, and I will let you know when I get back. If you need more of the show while I'm gone, feel free to head over to Patreon, sign up for $5 a month, and get access to that sweet, sweet bonus content. I have patient and staff stories over there. I have newspaper headlines. I have works by Janet Frame. That's about all I have right now, but there will be more, so go check it out. And be sure to follow the show on Instagram at Behind the Walls Pod. Join the Facebook group if you haven't done so already. As always, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you are listening, but especially if that's on Apple Podcasts. And for our listeners in the US, please, please, please be sure to get out and vote on November 5th. Your voice and your vote are important. And of course, remember the words of Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Until next time. Thank you so much for listening to Behind the Walls of the World's Psychiatric Hospitals. Once again, I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Gallup. Cover image is by Christopher Payne. Check out my website at behindthewallspodcast.buzzsprout.com. Follow the podcast and learn more on Facebook at Behind the Walls Podcast and Instagram at Behind the Walls Pod. For questions or recommendations, email me at behindthewallspodcast@gmail.com. You can find new episodes every Monday on Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening right now. If you like the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find and listen to the show, and I would be so grateful. Please stay tuned for more episodes of Behind the Walls of the World's Psychiatric Hospitals. Until next time.